Hi everyone. So I'm going to walk you through my status in terms of race, gender, ethnicity, etc., and all that stuff, and determine my blind spots and hopefully figure out how to eliminate them. Um, I am female. I still am female. I did have a relationship, lesbian relationship, when I was 26 years old. It was a 6-month affair at a time when I was exploring my sexuality, and at the same time I was disillusioned with men. I was born Filipino. My father was a mix of Filipino, Chinese, and Spanish, born into an upper middle class family of upper middle class family that descended from a long line of lettered relatives, including Dr. Jose Rizal. If you don't know Dr. Jose Rizal, he was tagged as the Philippine national hero of the Philippines by the Filipino people. He was an ophthalmologist by profession, was a writer, and became a key member of the propaganda movement that advocated for political reforms under the Spanish regime. So that's a great thing. So coming from a long line of lettered relatives, what that meant to our family was we had to maintain the reputation of our family being highly intelligent, lettered, cultured. We were made to believe, well, my grandfather made us to believe that our intelligence, our prowess in language did not only come from training but also had to be innate. My mother, on the other hand, was born into a poor family of 11 siblings. She fought poverty at an early age of 9, selling rice cakes at the crack of dawn. And in her teenage years, she helped out. She helped her aunt retail clothes and garments at a public market to sustain her studies at night. So, gifted with very high intelligence, she graduated the valedictorian. And armed only with optimism, perseverance, and a full scholarship, she finished her degree, bachelor's degree in accountancy. She's her math geek. And then later on pursued medicine, but put it aside to prioritize being a wife and a mother of 2 girls. We are a patriarchal family. Before that, the Philippines, we were colonized by the Spaniards for more than 300 years. And later on was colonized by the Americans for, I think, half a century. I'm not sure how many years. So we were indoctrinated into the stem of white privilege through English as the language of instruction. From kinder through college, we spoke English and learned via textbooks curated by white Americans. Our education was patterned after academic programs in the United States. We lost pride in our native language and the culture that was expressed through it. And most critically, we became blind to white privilege. We have dark skin, but our model of beauty is of light white skin. We model ourselves after white American cultural icons such as Elvis Presley. We had an Elvis Presley of the Philippines. We are deeply religious, but of Christian Catholic faith. Unlike our Asian neighbors who are either predominantly Islamic, Buddhist, or Shintoist. Evaluating the effects of this colonial legacy, even from a Filipino national perspective, is challenging. But the advantages it has given us Filipinos as we migrated to America with its culture of privilege was easier to identify with. Philippine trained professionals like doctors, nurses, accountants, and bookkeepers had a relatively easier time in gaining licensure to practice their professions here. It is how the Filipinos dominated certain niche professions here, like accounting, bookkeeping, and nursing. It is rather ironic that we Filipinos in the Philippines appeared to have had more opportunities for educational advancement than African Americans. We migrate and work side by side with white bosses. And some wonder why we also find it hard to see white privilege, let alone understand it. But there's a catch. Our white curated education also made us conscious that we are never as good as whites. We are molded into the image of the American culture, to the image of white America, and but not as quite good as the Americans. So this is the inferiority complex that was ingrained in our colonial education. Apart from this cultural backdrop that I just mentioned, we are also a patriarchal society. And what that means is that the man is the head of the family, and the woman or wife is submissive to the husband, succumbing to the needs of the family and her husband's. In the Philippines, extramarital affairs are practiced mainly by Filipino men, Filipino husbands, as part of a psychosocial phenomenon expediently called the double standard. Filipino men believe that they have privilege, special prerogative to enjoy sex with other women as long as they give their wives comfortable lives and come home to them every night. I remember a wife of a presidential candidate back then quipped in retort to the public suspicion that her husband keeps a mistress. She says, if he has other women, they're welcome to the club, but at night he comes home to me. Philippine literature has shown that Filipino men tend to have affairs to boost their ego. It's not necessarily because of prestige or money, but the expectations of other men in general to prove their masculinity and machismo. So for many, a husband's indulgence in extramarital affair enhances their sense of manliness or machismo, as he takes pride in being able to dominate and be loved by more than one woman. So that was the background where my family was also set in. My mother, growing up in the country, married into the family of my father, obviously shifted from her lower status rank to the upper middle class rank by marriage. And I think also that was also because of her education. My mom because she was highly intelligent and she graduated with, she graduated with honors. And that's why I think my father respected my mom. So education was highly valued in our family. Luckily, I'm fortunate to have been born in the 70s. The epoch of women champions that marked the dawning that would change the course of history. The world today is definitely much a better place, friendlier place than it was 60 years ago. We have now evolved to become liberal in our ideas, in our sexual and attitudes and behavior. We now have modern principles that proclaim our rights, our right to economic success, right to our own bodies, right to our own lifestyle, and the right to name ourselves and our experiences. As a result, we now anticipate more from ourselves and from our relationships that we go into. We expect to be more independent in our thinking, more successful in our career, and more open to the possibilities of ever-expanding growth and experience. From our empowerment emerges the belief that we have control over our personal destiny. So thanks to the women of the 70s, these are the women who rose and fell with their status. These are the women who shaped us, the women who offered us this pleasant place we enjoy today. As a Filipino immigrant and a former colonial, I benefit from white privilege, and as a racial minority, I gain from the struggle against racism. Our presence in huge numbers today is a direct result of legislation that eliminated race-based immigration quotas. The removal of race-based immigration quotas plus our white curated education made us preferred immigrants to fill labor shortages in America. As America transitioned from industrial economy to a service economy. Our access to elite universities today is largely a result of affirmative action programs that was instituted to address racial discrimination in university admissions. Also, our English facility and our familiarity with the white culture primed us to take advantage of the freedom to choose where to live. Relative position of power in terms of physical appearance. I would say I'm attractive. I'm short. I have brown skin. Well, I used to have fair skin, but now I keep my tan all year round because now I appreciate my color. While we were molded into the image of white America, we also grew to feel conflicted about our Filipino culture because of the heavy influences of colonial forces. 300 years of Spanish colonization and nearly 50 years of U.S. colonization affected the lives of millions of Filipinos. Particularly through the attitude we've developed called colonial mentality. Colonial mentality is a form of internalized oppression that conditions colonized people, us Filipinos, to believe that their ethnic or cultural identity is inferior to Western culture or whiteness. So therefore, our lives striving to be westernized and learning to hate our indigenous roots. For example, Filipino women with dark skin tone share African American women's experience of whiteness. The association of white skin tone with beauty in the Filipino culture makes non-white Filipino feel inferior, especially interacting with men. Like black women in the United States, non-white Filipino women display a lack of pride for themselves and their cultural identity. They purchase skin whitening cosmetics to transform themselves according to the white ideal image of femininity. At present, Filipinos continue to adhere to white symbolic meanings. The Philippine mass media, for example, have taken over the former Western colonial masters' role in promoting notions that valorize white skin tone, particularly reproduce and they reinforce the association of white skin tone with beauty, as nurture Filipinos' desire to be white through skin whitening cosmetic advertisements. It's really a shame that our idealization of whiteness perpetuates the identity crisis of Filipinos, and it obstructs us from liberating ourselves from Western domination and cultivating pride and for a culture and identity. And dealing with colonial mentality is a process far too real and pervasive in our everyday lives. But it doesn't have to define us. In fact, in many ways, I fight against colonial mentality today. Not only allows me to heal, but be empowered. As I began to unlearn all the unhealthy conceptions I had of myself, I became self-aware of the ways colonial mentality negatively impacted me, which was an important first step in allowing me to decolonize my mind. I wanted to make a conscious effort in addressing it by first accepting its existence. And today I can say that I am a Filipino with pride. But it wasn't always that way. I didn't reach this point without hesitation. Although I was born a mestiza, fair-skinned woman of mixed native and foreign descent, I keep my skin tanned now and love my dark hair. Growing up in a family that values education and encourages excellence, it comes as no surprise that I practiced the same. So I did. We were lucky, fortunate enough to be sent to private schools. Not only private schools, it was an all-girl private school, Catholic school. One of the top 3 schools in the Philippines, where only wealthy families could afford. We lived in a huge house in the city in Makati, and my school was only at the end of the street, and all I had to do to get to school was walk. But I did not do that because we were chauffeured to the gate from when I was kindergarten and up to high school. The only time that I walked to school was when I was in college. That's because my father was very strict, being in a patriarchal family. I would say, sort of like, he sort of like was the, we sort of like had I'm not sure if you've seen the movie The Godfather. So that was sort of our family. My grandfather being the Godfather, and my dad being the Corleone, Michael Corleone. So my mom was like that. She was submissive to him for a very long time, always succumbing to his needs. And it wasn't fun when my father started being violent to my mother. That was a very bad period in our family. In fact, that was the reason that actually catapulted me into going into psychology, in the study of psychology. I wanted to understand the dynamics of my family with fire and fervor. I remember being a mediator growing up. I was a mediator between the two of them when they would fight. And all these concepts of enmeshment, triangles, it felt like if that was me that we were talking about. I was reading. So my mother was a victim of domestic violence. That also led me to do a thesis. My thesis, my bachelor's thesis, was actually on feminist counseling. The title of my thesis was feminist counseling. The effectiveness of feminist counseling on the self-concept and empowerment of battered women. We conducted this study in a crisis center called Women's Crisis Center back in the Philippines. That was in the 1990s, 1996. And so, yeah, I mean, what we heard from Lenore Walker, that was all true. Concepts of learned helplessness, and empowering women, using their strengths to empower them and encourage them to leave their plight. That very much resonated with me. having valid education and excellence. I strove for excellence, and I excelled academically from grade school to up until my doctoral degree. So after college, in college I received my bachelor's degree in psychology, and then that did not stop me. I wanted to do more. I wanted to learn more. I went into my master's in psychology while I was working part-time. No, I was working, and then I was studying part-time. And then after that, I wanted to, I continued to pursue my doctorate in psychology, in counseling psychology. And then in the middle of it, just before I was about to do my dissertation, I got burned out after my comprehensive exams and internships. So what I did was wanted to study School of Music. I went to formal School of Music. I studied piano. I studied voice as my major, and then piano as my minor. I also, studied piano from when I was, I think, 8 years old. But then it was like I was fluctuating. I would go in and out depending on my motivation. So I went back to school, to School of Music. I did 2 years of music, and then went on to do my dissertation. And while I was doing my dissertation, I also went into my postdoctoral course for play therapy in Australia, and also here in the United States. So yes, I have been studying, and up to now I'm still studying. I think I don't remember really working hard when I was in the Philippines because I didn't have to, but I didn't have to. What I did after my play therapy courses in the United States, in Texas, and in Australia was I put up my own clinic. I set up my own clinic. It was a play therapy clinic I called Kid Whisperer, which promoted child-centered play therapy. And I did psychological evaluations, individual psychotherapy, and child-parent relationship therapy with the family. And then after that, I went to the United States. I immigrated. And then that's when I started working. That's when I felt I was not privileged at all, because I did not have, although I had a visa, I had a 10-year multiple visa. I didn't have a permanent resident card to back me up, to enable me to work as a psychologist. But because I wanted to be in America, I love New York so much. I wanted to be here. And at that time, my father already passed away. My mother was here. They were already separated. I followed my mom here in America. Well, I followed my mom here in the U.S. She lives in Jersey now. I wanted to be in New York. And so to survive in New York, before that, I was a caregiver first when I was in Jersey with my mom for a few months. I think close to a year, I became a caregiver to two elderly women. They were very nice. They're lovely. Learned a lot from them. It was funny because they were polar opposites. One had very sharp memory and one had Alzheimer's, so I had to take care of them. I also did psychological consultations with the family, which was actually I felt like it was an application of my career. And then wanting to be in New York, I decided that I was going to be a bartender. So I learned bartending, and for a very long time I was a bartender, and I learned how it was to be underprivileged. I learned how it was to be perceived uneducated. People thought I didn't have a PhD because I was behind the bar. And that really hurt me. It was a very humbling experience. I remember being in New York. My first apartment there was with the 5 roommates. I had 5 roommates, female roommates. And I didn't even have a room to myself. So it was very humbling, but it was something I wanted to do because I didn't care if I didn't have a label. I didn't care if I wasn't, I changed my identity. I wanted to be part of that. And so that was reading our articles resonated with me, seeing myself as somebody who actually differentiated herself from the family, and even actually sort of like probably estranged myself, but not really. Because I wanted to be here. And so while I wasn't able to practice psychology here, I stayed connected with the APA, American Psychological Association, as well as the Association for Play Therapy, and kept abreast of the current practices. I also broadened my psychological philosophy through, believe it or not, my experience as a bartender. I was doing like therapy with a twist. And I also broadened my psychological philosophy through waitressing and being an actress. I studied acting here while I was bartending. I went to the acting studio. I studied from 2012, and then we go in and out until 2 years ago. So while working in these areas may seem off base, I found that these experiences helped develop my approach to psychology and understanding of people of all backgrounds. And in January 2020 this year, I became a permanent resident, a milestone that I have been working towards for quite some time. And so now that I'm a permanent resident, I can practice psychology again. And so before diving back into practicing, though, I recognize the importance of gaining further education here with a reputable American school, which is why I'm here at Alliant taking marriage and family therapy. Being a therapist puts me in a position of power or privilege. Throughout my doctoral program, I've had vast field experience working in settings such as hospitals, outpatient care, government agencies, and private group practices. This experience allowed me to provide exceptional care no matter what the setting. And at all occasions, I was constantly engaged in assessment and conducting individual and group therapy sessions with children, adolescents, and adults whose challenges include ADHD, learning disabilities, academic stress, and other challenges that included family changes. So I was also involved in consultation services for people with addictive behaviors and relational problems. I likewise work with psychiatric outpatient populations, battered women, and rape survivors. As an associate, I was selected to practice under 2 of the most reputable clinical and forensic psychologists in the Philippines, Dr. Diane and Dr. Alianan, and at both locations I honed professional skills, my psychological evaluation skills in the niche areas of forensic psychology and annulment, and corporate recruiting and benchmark testing. I had the chance to coordinate with lead psychologists in group practice setting and to ensure accuracy in findings and recommendations and treatment plans. I also served as a pioneer in the area of child-centered play therapy, one of the pioneers in the Philippines. At that time, there was no training for play therapy in the Philippines. So, like I said earlier, I continued my education abroad, enabled me to effectively use play therapy techniques in my practice. Because of it, elicited notable rehabilitative and behavioral changes in children who experience issues associated with developmental delays and disabilities, and trauma. And because my practice has not been linear, the way that I approach psychology and the breadth of clients I can serve is quite unique. Being an immigrant myself allows me for an ability to engage in cross-cultural, compassionate communications. Having drank from the fountain of white privilege, I, as a Filipino immigrant, have a stake in removing those stains of white privilege from the fabric of American society. I can start by being more critically aware of my own culture, my own attitudes, my biases, especially implicit biases and implicit prejudices, infused into me by my colonial heritage. This way I could start to pay forward the benefits I received from the struggles of the past. As a practitioner who occupy a position of privilege and who choose to confront racism, to challenge oppression of women, to challenge the dominant discourse, I must stand ready to initiate dialogue about power and to demonstrate that I possess the ears that can hear these concerns. My blind spots would be patriarchy, women, gender, racism. As a Filipino immigrant who enjoys privileged status, I have a serious leg up in society. I need to celebrate that. Whatever generation of Filipino, I'm not Filipino American yet. I just married an American citizen. He's Brazilian, by the way. So understanding my privilege helps me clarify exactly how I can contribute to the American landscape. Knowing why my grandparents and mom came here, why their friends and all our family members came here, helps shape what I stand for and even more what I march against. It influences how I constructively work and live in a multicultural world and make the best of the diversity around me. It may even influence how I define future contributions to the Philippine motherland. I would suggest that anything in my ethnic history that gives me an upper hand in navigating society can be considered a strategic asset, not just for myself, but for everyone I touch and influence. Consider what our country would be like if we levered those things to make America awesome.